Hi, I'm Delphine. My parents used to call me the help at family events. They'd say things like, "You don't eat with us, you assist." So I did what any obedient daughter would do. I stayed quiet, cleared plates, smiled through it. But after being told, again, that I wasn't really family, I made a decision. I bought the entire resort they vacation at every summer. And now, they eat on land they don't even know belongs to me. But what hurts more than their words is what came next. The lawsuit, the fake Facebook posts, the whispered lies at church brunch. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you, while still being expected to pay the bill? Let me show you. The next morning, no one noticed I was gone until the cake had already been served. I had been gone for hours by then, long enough to pack my small suitcase, check out under another name, and drive down the winding roads back to my own place without hitting traffic. Funny thing, traffic. People think it's the obstacle, but silence, the kind where you expect someone to call your name and they don't, that's heavier than any rush hour. When I pulled up to the family resort the day before, I already knew how the day would go. My mother had sent the invitation on group text, not directly, not personally. Just a link to the event page with a "would be nice if you came." Not "please come," not "we'd love to see you," just "would be nice." That's how it always started. The lobby was dressed like a wedding catalog. White roses, dripping candle chandeliers, linen napkins folded like origami swans. Every inch of it screamed curated warmth, but none of it felt like home. I caught a glimpse of my brother, Branson, near the check-in. Of course he got the hug. The proud smile. The handshake from Uncle Roy, the one who never remembered my name unless I wore a name tag. Branson spotted me and gave a nod, like he was greeting a distant coworker. Not a sister. Certainly not the girl who once covered for him in high school when he snuck out past curfew. But maybe I should have expected that. Branson had always played it safe. He became exactly who my parents hoped one of us would be. Doctor, married. Divorced now, but that's another story. White picket fence in the suburbs, 401k. Dentist clean smile. The golden one. I stepped up to the reception table and gave my name. The woman behind the clipboard flipped a few pages. Then she smiled, confused. "Oh, you're not on the guest seating list, but your mom said you'd help with appetizers. I think you're on the catering team's list instead." She said it kindly, like it made sense. I didn't argue. I just nodded, reached for the tray of deviled eggs they offered, and walked toward the patio. That's when I realized. No one had even asked why I didn't bring someone. No, "where's your +1?" No, "glad you could make it." I was a fixture, something to fill a gap. Not a guest, not a daughter. As I wove through the crowd, balancing a tray, I passed Aunt Sylvia gossiping loudly by the mimosa bar. "Delphine?" she said, squinting like she was trying to remember if I was someone's assistant. "Isn't she doing something with computers? Online?" My mother chimed in, laughing. "She helps with some projects. You know, little things. She likes to keep herself busy." Busy. That word. Not successful, not driven, just busy. Like a bored housewife tinkering with paint-by-number crafts. Someone reached for an egg from my tray, didn't even look me in the eye, and asked, "Could you grab more lemon water, please?" He thought I worked there, and no one corrected him. At that moment, I wanted to say something, anything. But what would I even say? "Actually, I own this resort now?" Not yet. Not like that. There's a time and a way to deliver the truth, and this wasn't it. Dinner came. I watched them set the table, round, elegant, marked with name cards. Everyone was called over, seated with smiles and camera phones snapping away. I stood near the edge, waiting. Branson was already toasting with Dad. My seat never appeared. I approached cautiously. Maybe it was a mistake. My father didn't even look up. "Del, you can eat after. They're short-staffed. Help get the older folks settled first, will you?" He waved his hand toward the back, like I was one of the servers. my fingers wrapped around the edge of a napkin a little too tightly. I stood there for one beat, then two, waiting, hoping someone would say something, but no one did. Branson didn't even meet my eyes, so I turned, walked toward the service door that led to the kitchen. I paused halfway, between two worlds, one I never truly belonged to, and one I had spent years building from scratch. "I'm not your staff," I whispered. No one heard. A young girl with a catering badge passed me with a smile and a quick, "Excuse me." I stepped aside for her. At least she acknowledged me. Outside, the air was cooler than expected. I leaned against the wooden railing overlooking the vines that stretched beyond the property line, steady and unconcerned. My phone buzzed. One word, finalized. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let the breeze touch my cheek like a quiet reminder. Then, I turned toward the lodge, still filled with clinking glasses and stories I wasn't invited into, and murmured under my breath, "Then I guess it's mine now." 2 hours later, I was gone, and nobody noticed until the cake had already been served. I had left before the eggs were cold, before the patio started buzzing with champagne toasts and mimosa-fueled nostalgia. I didn't bother saying goodbye. That would have implied I'd been welcomed in the first place. The morning air was softer than I expected. Fog clung to the edges of the vineyard, like it didn't want to let the day begin. My heels clicked against the flagstone as I stepped back into the dining hall, trying to shrink into the background without actually disappearing. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to be present long enough for no one to accuse me of not showing up. By the time I arrived, most people were already halfway through breakfast. Branson was holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by cousins and uncles, who still called him Doc, even though they knew about the malpractice board review. Reputation always ran slower in this family, especially when denial was a better suit to wear than accountability. I hovered near the buffet, pouring myself a small cup of coffee. My mother spotted me and waved, not to join the table, but to point toward the mimosa pitcher. She mouthed, "Could you refill that?" Like I'd volunteered for brunch duty. I gave her a small smile, not because I wanted to, but because it felt easier than refusing. That's when I noticed the photographer. Black slacks, black vest, professional gear around his neck. The same man who had taken pictures the night before. He was adjusting the lighting near the east-facing windows and calling out to the family. "Let's get one with all immediate family. Quick shot before dessert?" People began rising from their seats. My mother clapped lightly. "Branson, get up here. Stand next to your dad. Sylvia, make sure the little ones don't block the front." I moved, instinctively, toward the forming cluster, then paused. The photographer looked around and asked, "Is this everyone?" And my father, without even glancing in my direction, said, "Let's keep it tight. No need to overcomplicate the frame." My feet stopped. No one turned. Branson adjusted his tie and slipped into place between Merrick and my mother like he was born to belong. I stepped back, quietly, deliberately, the kind of retreat you make when you've learned that staying costs more than leaving. The camera shutter clicked. I didn't hear my name once. As the photo wrapped, I heard a cousin near the juice bar murmur, "Awkward," followed by a short laugh. I didn't turn around. I refilled the mimosa pitcher. No one said thank you. I didn't expect them to. When breakfast wound down, a second table was being cleared at the far end of the room. Smaller, no place cards. One server began placing utensils in a quick, impersonal rhythm. I assumed it was for late arrivals or overflow, so I picked up my plate and made my way to the main table. Just as I had done dozens of times before in my life. Somewhere between hopeful and naive. My mother caught my movement and leaned in, smiling too tightly. "Oh no, honey," she whispered. "This table's for family. Yours is over there, with the kitchen crew. You understand?" I froze. Not out of surprise, but out of exhaustion. I had no more rebuttals left. No more energy to explain why that smile cut deeper than a slap. I simply turned and walked toward the other table. And that's when I decided. This would be the last time they saw me fill silence with service. Once I finished eating, I excused myself and stepped outside. The sun had finally risen past the fog line, casting soft gold over the rows of grapevines. I took out my phone, tapped on a calendar reminder, and dialed a number I had memorized but never used aloud. "Yes," I said when the assistant answered. "I'll confirm the board review document by Tuesday. Also, let's schedule the ribbon cutting for next month. Coordinate with local press." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Congratulations, Ms. Hoyt. Full ownership, it's official." I hung up. Across the vineyard, the resort stood tall and oblivious, its main deck hosting the final brunch clinks of a family that never knew I was in the room, much less in control of the building. A hummingbird zipped past my ear, its wings a blur of intention. I let it pass. No one inside noticed I was missing. Again. But this time, it felt different. This time, they were standing on my floor. By the time my letter arrived on their doorstep, I was already 50 miles away, and freer than I'd felt in years. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving the resort early. I didn't owe that to people who hadn't noticed when I was standing right next to them. While they sliced into lemon cake and toasted to family traditions, I was already halfway to my house, windows rolled down, letting the wind do the talking. I needed the quiet. I needed space from rooms where I only ever existed in service, not in memory. But silence has a half-life. It lingers longer than it should. And by late morning, I found myself driving back. Not home, not quite, but back toward the lounge area, where the extended family had gathered for one last round of coffee before checkout. I wasn't there for them. I just needed to walk in, see it clearly, feel it fully, and know that when I left this time, I meant it. The lounge smelled of burnt espresso and too much cologne. They always wore too much cologne, like scent could distract from character. I slipped in through the side entrance, past the antique piano my uncle always bragged about owning a replica of. Nobody looked up. A few chairs scraped against tile, laughter echoed across the room. My mother was perched in the corner, sipping her drink with a posture that said she was tired, but only of pretending to care. "Branson," someone said from across the room, "we heard about the board suspension. How's that going?" There was a long pause. Then one of my cousins, Janine, I think, cleared her throat and added, "It's probably just temporary, right? Everyone knows these things blow over." My Aunt Sylvia leaned forward. "He's under pressure, that's all. Still, a doctor is a doctor." I waited to hear my name. I waited to hear anything about what I'd done, or hadn't done. Nothing. I sat near the window, letting my silence take up more space than usual. There's a particular ache that comes from watching people rewrite the story while you're still in the room, like you're the ghost of your own timeline. Then came the real gut punch. Uncle Ross, polishing off his second whiskey before noon, said it loud enough to be heard by anyone not actively trying to ignore me. "Delphine should be grateful she doesn't have kids. Imagine the mess she'd make of that." I didn't flinch. Aunt Margie chuckled, swirling her drink like it made her wiser. "She always was a little off, not built for real life." My mother just nodded. Not a word in my defense. Not a breath of discomfort. Just that same expression she wore at church. Detached approval. My stomach turned, but I stayed still. That's a skill you learn in families like mine. How to stay still when everything inside you wants to stand and scream. Someone from across the table, probably one of Branson's golf buddies, smirked and said, "Hey, Branson, your sister's still doing websites or something?" He laughed, shrugged. "I think she moved into property now. She's always got some little project going. You know her." I looked up just once and said calmly, "Actually, I closed on a 7-figure deal last month." That should have landed like a thunderclap. Instead, my father glanced at me, nodded without real attention, and said, "That's nice, dear. Anyway, Branson." And just like that, the spotlight went back to him. As if I hadn't spoken. As if my success was a polite interruption in the main event of his mediocrity. I stood slowly, placed my half-full cup on the side table, and started to walk away. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going or if I was okay. Then a voice, soft, small, honest, came from behind. "Why don't you live near Grandma and Grandpa?" It was my niece. Her hair still damp from a morning swim, her eyes too young to lie. I knelt beside her, looked her straight in the eye, and said gently, "Because even grown-ups know when they're not welcome." She tilted her head like she didn't fully understand, but she would. One day, I walked out without another word. The sunshine hit different this time. It wasn't warm, it was clarifying. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. A message from my attorney. "Full transfer confirmed. You own 100%. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stopped walking and stared out at the edge of the vineyard beyond the lot, past the rows of grapevines and the neat white fencing. You don't need to burn bridges. Some collapse on their own when you stop carrying the weight. I stayed one final night, not out of obligation, but because I needed to end things clean. I didn't want anyone to say I stormed out, or that I made a scene. Quiet exits are harder to rewrite in family lore. The resort had finally emptied out by evening. No more heels clacking down the hallway. No more wine-stained laughter drifting from the main hall. Just the slow hum of cleaning machines and the gentle hush of linens being folded by hands that worked with more grace than anyone gave them credit for. I closed the door to my suite behind me and exhaled. The kind of exhale that only comes when you're not trying to hold your shape for other people anymore. I folded each piece of clothing carefully, out of habit, not sentiment. I wasn't packing to retreat, I was packing to conclude, to step out of a role I never auditioned for, but was cast in anyway. There was a notepad on the desk. Resort stationery, gold-trimmed. I sat down, picked up the pen, and wrote what needed to be said. If I was never family in your heart, don't expect me to act like one on paper. I paused. No rage, no sobbing, just clarity. You raised me out of duty, I'm leaving out of choice. I left the note on the desk. No envelope, no signature. Anyone who read it would know who it came from. Then, I opened the folder my lawyer had sent over 2 days earlier. Inside was a final copy of the acquisition transfer, notarized and official. At the top, the Cecilia Resort, full acquisition authorization. Below it, my name, Delphine Hoyt, etched in confident font that no one in that family had ever said out loud with pride. Beside the papers was a photograph I always kept tucked into the sleeve of my planner. My grandmother, Cecilia, sitting on a rattan bench with me, age 7, cross-legged and barefoot beside her. She was the only one who ever told me, "You don't have to be good at everything to be loved." She passed when I was in college. Nobody from the family came to the funeral. They said it was too far, too last minute, or she wasn't really immediate family. But she was mine, always was. I had renamed the resort after her months ago, in the contracts, on the paperwork, in every internal system. No one knew, not yet. I walked the resort grounds slowly that night, past the pool, where the floating candles had already been removed, past the lawn, where yesterday they posed for a photo I was never invited into. The garden lights glowed softly, throwing shadows against the hedges. A young man from the cleaning crew nodded as I passed. "Evening, ma'am." I nodded back. He didn't know my full name, but he knew I signed the checks. That was enough. In the distance, the staff was still tidying up after my family, picking up cocktail napkins they couldn't be bothered to throw away, straightening chairs that had been left crooked. Watching them reminded me of something I read once. Power isn't in how loudly you speak, but in how many people stop when you whisper. And I hadn't even begun to whisper yet. Later that night, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea and watched the lights go out, one wing at a time. My phone sat next to me, screen dark. No one had texted. No one asked if I was coming to breakfast in the morning, or if I made it home. I wasn't surprised. I had trained myself not to expect much from people who always delivered less. Still, the silence wasn't heavy. It was final. Just before sunrise, I walked to the front gate. Maintenance was mounting the new signage as scheduled. black iron lettering, clean, timeless. The Cecilia, a sanctuary of renewal. Below that, in smaller script, in honor of those who saw us before we saw ourselves. I didn't stay for the final drill into the concrete. I didn't need to. The plaque would outlast every false narrative they ever wrote about me. Let them spin their stories. I'd written mine in ink and deed. As I stood near the gravel drive, letting the early wind graze my skin, I felt something loosen. Not fall apart, just fall away. Like shedding a coat that never fit. Sometimes family doesn't raise you. Sometimes it's the strangers who never needed to love you, but did anyway. The bus driver who waited when you were late. The teacher who stayed after class. The grandmother who made space without asking you to shrink first. I turned back toward the building, now fully mine, and whispered, not to anyone in particular. I didn't leave to be seen. I left to see myself. 3 months passed, long enough for things to settle, but not enough for people like my family to forget. Not truly. They don't remember details. They remember optics. And the optics had shifted. That morning, as I stood on the second-floor balcony of the resort, my resort, I watched the event staff finish setting up the relaunch ceremony. White chairs on polished stone, hydrangeas imported from Santa Barbara, a modest arch draped in chiffon. Clean, quiet, elegant. No one from my family was invited. Not that they'd care. Not that they even knew. Well, not yet. I walked the venue in a navy sheath dress. The same one my mother once called cheap-looking at a Christmas brunch. Her exact words were, "Try something with structure, sweetheart. You always look like you're drowning in basics." That was the year Branson's wife showed up in a $1,200 dress and got a standing ovation for her side hustle making baby food pouches. Now, that cheap dress moved through the crowd of Napa executives, real estate developers, and hospitality insiders without drawing so much as a whisper, except maybe, "Who is she?" My name wasn't on the speaker list. I hadn't planned to say anything. But when the resort manager introduced the woman responsible for the rebirth of this historic property, and every head turned my way, I didn't flinch. I stepped forward and smiled like I'd rehearsed it. "Thank you," I said into the mic, "for being here. Not just to celebrate a building, but to witness something a little harder to rebuild. Identity." There was a pause. Respectful, quiet. I had them. I know what it feels like to be in a room and not be seen. To exist just outside the frame, behind the scenes, beneath the surface. That's where I lived for a long time. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I didn't need to. I didn't build this place to prove anything. I built it because I was tired of disappearing. There's a difference between leaving quietly and being silenced. I left a house, not a family. Because a family, at least to me, is where you're allowed to exist without auditioning for the role. Applause came slower than I expected. But when it did, it stayed with me longer than most things ever had. After the event, I slipped away before anyone could corner me for a quote. I didn't want sound bites. I wanted peace. But the internet doesn't believe in peace. 2 days later, a hospitality blogger posted a blurry photo of me beside the new resort signage. "Meet the woman behind the Cecilia." The caption underneath read, "She's not just the new owner. She's the reason it didn't go under." The post gained traction, then speed, then fire. My inbox flooded with messages from former coworkers, past acquaintances, even 2 cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. All variations of, "Is this you?" followed by emojis and links. I didn't reply. Then my phone vibrated again. This time, a text from a number I hadn't seen in a while. "Mom." The message was short. "Are you the Cecilia woman everyone's talking about?" I stared at the screen, read it twice, then let the phone fall face down on the table. That evening, I poured myself a glass of red and opened my laptop, half intending to draft a reply, half thinking I might delete it all. Instead, I stumbled on a folder labeled Unsent. Inside was a draft email I'd written months ago, addressed to my parents. It said, I built something beautiful, but I never wanted to use it against you. I hovered over the send button, then I closed the window and hit delete. I didn't owe anyone my softness, not anymore. The resort lights flickered on as the sun began to dip. I stood at the balcony, looking down at a place they used to claim as theirs, taking credit for finding it, loving it, making it special. That was the lie they liked to pass around, that their legacy was what gave this place value. They'd be furious if they found out it was mine now, but they wouldn't say it directly. No, they'd find a more subtle way to say it, something like, "We just thought it would have stayed in the family." That was the thing, it never was. And just as I let that thought settle into my chest, my phone rang again. Not press. Not an investor. Dad. The name lit up the screen like a flare in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. Because if he was calling, it wasn't to apologize. It was to ask for something. I didn't answer the call. I didn't need to. Whatever he had to say would arrive another way. With my father, it always did. By mid-morning the next day, a courier showed up at my gate. No signature required. Just a thick white envelope in a manila sleeve, hand-delivered, sealed with embossed initials. It smelled faintly like the aftershave he used to wear, woodsy, overbearing, a scent that lingered too long after he'd left the room. I opened it at the kitchen counter, next to the coffee I hadn't touched since it cooled. The paper was thick, expensive. Of course it was. The first page was a letter, typed, formal, stiff as cardboard. The kind that uses phrases like continued goodwill and amicable resolution. My parents, through their attorney, were requesting what they called a fair and honorable contribution toward decades of parental investment. They'd listed exact figures: tuition, summer camps, orthodontics, health insurance premiums, even groceries. The spreadsheet was titled, in all caps, Estimated Value of Upbringing. It included a suggested total, just shy of $620,000. They had itemized affection. I didn't laugh. I didn't rage. I sat down and read it line by line like it was a contract, because maybe that's all I ever was to them, a poorly performing asset looking to be offloaded with whatever payout they could spin into virtue. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the demand, but because of the precision. The gall of treating parenthood like a loan agreement. And me, a balance sheet to settle. 2 days later, I noticed movement on the perimeter camera at the front gate. I opened the app. There he was. Merrick Hoyt, my father. Standing with his hands behind his back, like a man visiting a grave he didn't really care about, but felt obligated to stop by. I didn't go out. I hit the intercom. "This isn't a place for drop-ins," I said flatly. He didn't flinch. "You always did like distance." "This is not the way to fix anything," I said. "I didn't come to fix. I came to speak." "There's nothing to say. You had years." He sighed, loud enough for the audio to pick up. "You were always hard to love, Del." I should have felt gutted. I didn't. Maybe because I'd heard it before. Maybe not those exact words, but enough close cousins of that phrase to know where I stood. I ended the call. Later that day, I had my legal team draft a response. Clear, cold, professional. "There will be no payment," the letter read. "The emotional labor extracted under the guise of familial duty has long exceeded your valuation." I attached the footage of him at my gate. Not to threaten, just to document. My lawyer called later that afternoon. "They'll go public," she said. "You know that, right?" "Let them," I replied. "They don't know how to stay quiet unless they're being ignored." And just like clockwork, 3 days later, an anonymous Facebook post started making rounds in our old neighborhood group. The kind of post written to sound humble, but carefully constructed to spread like wildfire. "Please pray for us," it began. "Our daughter, who's done well for herself, has chosen to cut ties. After all we've given, after all we've done." There was a photo attached, grainy. Me, walking out of the TEDx venue, cropped just enough to erase the signage, but leave the body language. I looked like I was rushing away from something shameful. The post closed with, "Sometimes success makes people forget where they came from." By midnight, it had been shared over 300 times. I clicked Save Post. I didn't comment. I didn't correct. I just watched. The next morning, I woke to 3 canceled meetings. A software partner backed out, citing concerns about recent personal press. One of my early investors requested a private conversation. And there it was. The plan. Not to take money, not even to win, but to stain. Make me small enough that whatever I'd built would feel shaky again, like I didn't deserve it, like I was too damaged to be trusted at the helm of anything more than grief. I stared out at the lavender field behind my kitchen, the breeze pushing purple blossoms in gentle waves. And I thought, this is why they raised me to be silent, so that when they screamed, no one would hear my side first. But they forgot one thing: I own my voice now. And no matter what came next, they couldn't take that back. That night, I didn't celebrate. I opened my laptop, and I rewrote every contract they ever hid behind. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paper, bank statements, legal drafts, signed agreements with embossed logos. My attorney, Tamsin, had sent over everything I'd need if things escalated. She didn't say when, she said if, but we both knew better. By sunrise, my name was everywhere. Not because of the resort, not because of the TEDx talk, but because of the post. The one they seeded with just enough guilt to feel like scripture. Daughter makes millions and leaves her parents behind. No calls, no support, no visits. It had a photo, blurred of course. One they probably didn't take themselves, but encouraged someone else to share. A picture of me, walking across the parking lot in sunglasses and a linen blazer, like I was dodging cameras instead of heading to my car. The caption underneath read, "She forgot where she came from." Within hours, the coverage shifted from hospitality triumph to personal scandal. Commentators called me cold. One morning, Anchor referred to me as the billionaire who left her folks to rot. My inbox filled with meeting cancellations. One client cited values misalignment. Another said, "We just need to let the media cycle cool down." I didn't respond to any of it. I just called Tamsin. "Send the file," I told her. She didn't ask which one. 2 days later, the courtroom smelled of carpet glue and nerves. The kind of smell you don't notice unless you've sat in rooms where families break each other slowly, through polite arguments and legal terms that feel clinical even when they're cutting deep. My parents sat 3 rows ahead of me. Merrick in a charcoal suit too sharp for sincerity, and Verlene in a navy blouse I remember from every graduation I ever had. Always worn like armor, never joy. Their lawyer was a man named Craig. Of course it was Craig, all firm jaw and practiced outrage. He stood and started with words like neglect, emotional harm, and moral dereliction. He painted me as a woman who had climbed out of their sacrifices and kicked the ladder away on the way up. I didn't flinch. Not when he brought up their support during her formative years. Not when he referenced the emotional weight borne by aging parents discarded in their twilight. And when he called me ungrateful, I just breathed through it. Then it was our turn. Tamsin didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. She moved with the precision of someone who knew that silence had weight when you placed it in the right corners. She pulled up a screen. "I'd like to present a collection of communications between Ms. Hoyt and her parents," she said, including a voicemail dated 2 years ago from Merrick Hoyt. The video played. The audio was crisp. "You're good with numbers, Delphine," Merrick's voice said through the speakers. "That's what you are, a glorified maid with a calculator." Gasps, then murmurs. The kind of hum that means people aren't quite shocked, just newly certain of something they'd suspected. The next clip was of my mother. I remembered that call. I hadn't saved it out of spite. I'd saved it because something in my gut told me I might need it one day. "I don't know what she's wearing. It looks like she bought it from a clearance bin at Ross. She never had taste, never had polish." Someone in the audience coughed awkwardly. The judge looked up. And that was before Branson's voice joined the chorus, laughing in the background. Tamsin didn't say much after that. She didn't have to. The judge asked if there was context, if anyone else could verify what had been played. I didn't expect what came next. Glenora Pike walked in. My cousin. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature, in weight, in how she carried herself. Like she had finally decided to put something down and walk without it. She was sworn in, sat down, and told the court what I had never asked anyone to say out loud. I was there, she said. Every Christmas, every dinner, every birthday. She paused. They'd talk over her, around her, like she wasn't even seated at the same table. Once, they thanked the caterer at Dad's retirement party, but not Delphine, even though she planned the whole thing. She pulled out her phone, played a voicemail forwarded from her mother. Verlene's voice again. Del was never like us. She's useful, not family. The room didn't make a sound for 3 full seconds. Then the judge adjusted his glasses. Case dismissed, he said. I didn't smile. As I stood to leave, reporters began to gather outside. I stepped through the glass doors into the light and said only this. I never abandoned them. I left before they could. Later that evening, as my legal team wrapped up paperwork, we delivered one final motion, one they weren't expecting. A restraining order. For both of them. It wasn't spite, it was protection. Because even adults who've grown out of childhood wounds can still bleed if someone keeps cutting in the same place. The headlines faded within 2 weeks. The interviews dried up, the hashtags cooled, and the world moved on. As it always does when outrage exhausts itself. The silence that followed was different. This one I chose. One Sunday morning, after my usual walk along the ridge behind the resort, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and recorded a 6-minute video. No makeup, no script. Just me, a soft cotton sweater, and a truth I wasn't ashamed of anymore. No, I didn't leave out of hate, I said, looking straight into the lens. I left because love wasn't a language we shared, not in that house. I spoke slowly. No names, no direct accusations, just moments, snapshots that lived in my chest for too long. Sometimes people raise you to make you useful, not to make you feel loved. Sometimes you don't even realize what was missing until you try to build something different, something that doesn't hurt. The video was raw but not bitter. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about them. It was about me, finally stepping out from under the need to explain. Within hours, it crossed 2 million views. The comments poured in. You just told my story. I didn't know how much I needed to hear this until now. You said what I've never been able to say to my own parents. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That same week, my parents were spotted in town. Same grocery store, same post-church routine. But this time, someone approached them. Mr. Weldon Avery, our old neighbor from when I was 8, apparently saw them in the parking lot and walked up. I wasn't there, but a friend who still lived in the area called me about it that night. He didn't say it loud, she told me, but he said it plain. You didn't lose a daughter, you never made room for one. According to her, Verlene froze. Just stood there, holding a bag of apples like the air had left her lungs. Merrick muttered something about people not knowing the full story, but his face gave him away. He looked embarrassed, not ashamed, just exposed. That moment didn't change anything in the legal sense, but for me, it meant everything. Because for once, someone else said it, and not because I needed defending, but because they needed reminding. Glenora messaged me that same week. It came as a voice memo, the first one she'd sent since the day she testified. I'm not calling to apologize, she said. I figure if I have to say sorry, I probably don't mean it yet. She paused. But I see it now. I see all of it. They never let you be you. And I was part of that. I laughed when they joked about your shoes. I stood by when they cut your name from the thank you speech. There was another long pause. You don't need me to stand beside you, but I will, if you want that. I didn't reply. I didn't know if I wanted that, but I saved the message, because sometimes recognition is worth more than reconciliation. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine and went through old voicemails. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to clear space. I deleted the message where Merrick asked if I'd finally stopped wasting money on vanity projects. I deleted Verlene's recording where she told me to think about how this looks on us. But I kept one. My grandmother, Cecilia. Soft voice, full of warmth. Don't worry, baby. You don't have to earn love here. I played that one twice. The next morning, I sat under the old cypress tree near the west lawn of the resort. The same place where guests now came to write, reflect, or just sit with their thoughts. I brought a blank journal, not for the public, not for TEDx, not for another speech, just for me. On the first page, I wrote, "Peace is not the silence of others. It's the end of needing their noise." Then I closed the book. I didn't need to write more that day. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is the one that doesn't chase approval. Later that week, I walked the perimeter trail around the property and passed by a mother and daughter staying for the weekend. The girl couldn't have been more than 10. She pointed to the plaque that read, "The Cecilia, a sanctuary of renewal." "Who's Cecilia?" she asked. The mom smiled and said, "Probably someone important." She had no idea how right she was. Forgiveness is not an invitation. It's just the end of pursuit. 6 months later, I found myself in front of a familiar building, a squat brick bank tucked into a quiet corner of a town that once called me one of their own. I hadn't stepped foot there since I was 21, the summer I tried to open my first business account. Back then, the manager asked if I had a husband to co-sign, and my mother told him not to worry, she just likes to play CEO. Now I was there with my lawyer, a file folder under my arm, and a signed termination document ready to be processed. The cabin had sat on land adjacent to my resort for decades. Technically owned by a holding company my father used to navigate tax loopholes, it had always been his space, but he'd long since transferred the legal claim without realizing the implications. I let him think he still controlled it, until now. "I'm donating the parcel," I told the clerk behind the window. "Transfer it to the Wildwood Foundation. They run housing programs for single mothers." The woman's eyes widened. "You're giving it away?" "I'm giving it back," I said, "to someone who might actually use it to protect people." Behind me, Tamsin gave a small nod. She'd warned me this might stir something. Headlines, family outrage, Facebook group drama. I didn't care. "They'll say you're petty," she reminded me in the parking lot afterward, sliding her sunglasses back on. "Let them," I said. "They used to call me invisible. This is an upgrade." By the end of that week, the paperwork was processed, the cabin keys delivered, the locks changed. I didn't expect thanks. I didn't need them. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of everything that came before were starting to show. Branson, I'd heard through mutual connections, had checked into a rehab center out in Marin, not paid for by family, but sponsored by an old college roommate he hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, people outside your circle are more likely to throw you a rope when you finally fall out of the one that kept you suffocating. Verlene stopped attending her usual luncheons. One woman from the Rotary Club told an acquaintance of mine that she looked thinner, quieter, and less curated. She wasn't used to being watched without admiration. Merrick still taught part-time, but his name had been removed from the board of a local nonprofit he once chaired. No public announcement, no statement, just gone. The kind of quiet removal you don't notice until someone else's name is printed where yours used to be. And me? I got a letter. No return address. Handwritten. Short. "You've made your point." No signature. I didn't even finish reading it. I smiled, fed it into my shredder, and went on with my day. Some people mistake silence for surrender. Others use it as shelter. But me, I'd learned that the best peace isn't the kind you have to prove. It's the kind you never have to defend. One afternoon, I drove through my old neighborhood. Not for nostalgia. I didn't need memory to keep me company anymore. I stopped in front of the house I grew up in, now aged and tired, just like the people who once ruled it. I didn't knock. I didn't need to see anyone. Instead, I pulled out a photograph I'd printed that morning. A snapshot of my grandmother and me, sitting on the porch of the Cecilia, back when it was just a dream scribbled in my notebook. We were laughing, real belly-deep joy, not the curated kind my mother used to force before holiday dinners. On the back, I wrote, "She was my family. She still is." I folded it once, slipped it into the mailbox, and drove away without looking back. That evening, back at the resort, I hosted a small gathering for young women in business. Mentorship Roundtable, they called it. I didn't speak from a stage. I sat among them, sleeves rolled, legs crossed, same old navy sheath dress I'd worn the day I claimed my name. One woman, barely 30, asked me, "How did you forgive them?" I sipped my water, smiled gently, and said, "I didn't. I just stopped giving them a voice in my story." There was a pause, a breath of understanding. Later, as the sun dropped behind the vineyard, I stood on the west balcony of the main lodge and let the silence stretch. My voice, in the back of my mind, not broken, not forced, rose again. "You don't owe healing to those who caused the wound," I thought. "You owe it to the part of yourself that survived. Because in the end, some doors aren't meant to stay open. Not all families are broken. Some are just finished. And that's okay."